On the morning of July 11, 1795, a Royal Navy officer stood on the deck of the Bashante, somewhere off the coast of South Africa, and watched something come out of the darkness that would follow him for the rest of his life. It was 4 a.m. The sea was black. And then, glowing red, moving against a wind that shouldn't have carried it, an old Dutch ship appeared on the horizon. Its masts, its spars, its tattered sails, all of it lit from within by a light that had no source. The officer called for the captain. The captain called for a young midshipman on board, a boy who happened to be a prince and would one day become King George V of England. All three men stood frozen as the ghost ship crossed their bow, close enough to touch, and then vanished into the dark as if it had never existed at all. 6 hours later, the sailor who first spotted the ship fell 70 feet from the rigging and died on impact. This isn't folklore whispered in a dockside tavern. This is a documented entry in an official Royal Navy logbook, signed by officers whose entire careers depended on telling the truth about what they saw at sea. And it is only one of hundreds of sightings, spanning 300 years, of the most famous ghost ship in maritime history, the Flying Dutchman. For centuries, sailors swore this ship was real. They swore it appeared before storms. They swore that to see it meant death. And for just as long, we've been told the same tired explanation. Sailors were superstitious. Sailors were drunk. Sailors saw what they wanted to see in the fog. But that explanation has a problem. It doesn't explain why a future king of England saw it. It doesn't explain why 60 ordinary people on a beach in 1939 watched the same ship appear in broad daylight and then dissolve into nothing. And it doesn't explain why again and again, ships that crossed paths with the Dutchman went on to sink. So today we're not telling you it was a ghost, and we're not telling you it was nothing. We're going to show you what it actually was, a real physical phenomenon, hiding in plain sight over one of the deadliest stretches of ocean on Earth. One that didn't just terrify sailors, it killed them. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a ship can sail through the sky, why it always happened in the same place, and why the very same illusion that created the legend of the Flying Dutchman may have also sent the Titanic to the bottom of the Atlantic. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand the ghost, you first have to understand the grave it was born in. In the 1600s, the Cape of Good Hope was the single most important and most dangerous piece of ocean on the planet. Every ship sailing between Europe and the riches of the East Indies had to pass through it. Spices, silk, gold, porcelain, all of it moved through these waters, and the Dutch East India Company built an empire on the profits. But the passage itself was a slaughterhouse. Sailors didn't call it the Cape of Good Hope. They called it the Cape of Storms. This is the exact point on the globe where the cold Atlantic collides head-on with the warm Indian Ocean, and that collision generates some of the most violent, unpredictable weather any sailor will ever face. Swells reach 40 feet. Winds tear sails apart at 80 miles an hour. Between 1600 and 1800, the Dutch East India Company alone lost more than 400 ships in these waters. Each one carried well over 100 men. Do the math, and you're looking at somewhere north of 60,000 sailors who went into the Cape and never came out. That is the world Captain Hendrick van der Decken sailed in. According to the legend, van der Decken commanded a Dutch merchant vessel making the run toward Batavia in modern-day Indonesia sometime in the mid-1600s. He was known across the fleet as a captain obsessed with speed, a man who took risks other captains refused to take, because every extra day at sea cost the company money, and money was the only thing that mattered to him. When his ship reached the Cape, storm season was already closing in. Other captains were delaying their crossings. Van der Decken's first mate begged him to wait it out in port. Van der Decken refused. The storm that hit them on the crossing was, by every account, catastrophic. 70-mile-an-hour winds, 30-foot waves breaking clean over the deck, the rigging failing, men being ripped from the ropes and swallowed by the sea before anyone could even reach for them. And still, Van der Decken wouldn't turn back. The legend says he lashed himself to the wheel and drove the ship straight into the heart of the storm, screaming that he would round that cape if it took him until Judgment Day, daring God himself to stop him. Then the lights on his ship went dark, and the ship was never seen again, except that it was. 3 months later, Another merchant vessel making the same crossing spotted a ship approaching from the south, sailing directly against the wind, which is, on its own, physically impossible for a vessel with that rigging. As it closed the distance, the crew realized the ship was old, decades out of date. Its sails hung in rotted strips that somehow still caught wind that wasn't there. Its hull looked as though it had been smashed against rock over and over, and at the wheel stood a figure in a captain's coat, face locked in an expression somewhere between fury and madness. They tried to hail it. It didn't answer. It sailed straight toward their bow, and the crew braced for a collision that never came. The phantom ship passed through their hull like smoke, and the men on deck reported feeling a wave of ice-cold air the moment it did. 2 weeks later, a second ship reported the exact same sighting. Same location. Same ship. Same silent, spectral crew, and this time, the ship that had seen it sank 3 days later, in calm water, with no storm and no explanation. From that point on, the legend of the Flying Dutchman spread through every port, from Amsterdam to Cape Town, and sailors built an entire code of conduct around it. Never wave at the ship, never signal it, and above everything else, never accept anything from its crew, because the Dutchman would sometimes lower a longboat and try to deliver letters addressed to people who had been dead for decades, written in languages no living sailor could read, except one, and your ship was doomed within days. Refuse, and all you could do was pray it sailed on without you. By the 1700s, this wasn't a story anymore. It was a genuine, career-defining fear for every man who worked the Cape route. And the sightings didn't stop. They multiplied. We already told you about 1795 and Prince George on the Bacchante, and the sailor who fell to his death hours after spotting the ship. Here's the part most retellings leave out. The ship's official log entry from that night still exists. It reads that at 4 in the morning, the Flying Dutchman crossed their bow, glowing with a strange red light, so bright that the masts, the spars, and the sails of a ship 200 yards away stood out in sharp relief against the dark. That's not a campfire story. That's a legal maritime record, cross-signed by multiple officers, describing a level of visual detail that should be impossible for anything sitting on the horizon. In 1881, it happened again, this time to the crew of the Inconstant. 11 sailors, all on watch during the early morning hours, all independently reported the same glowing, fully rigged phantom ship moving at a speed that made no sense given the total absence of wind. It crossed their path around 500 yards out and disappeared without a sound. 11 trained Royal Navy observers, 11 matching testimonies. The century in between produced plenty more. In 1823, a British captain named George Barker logged an ancient Dutch ship with tattered sails off the South African coast, glowing as though it were on fire, with no smoke and no spreading flame. It sailed parallel to his ship for nearly 10 minutes before winking out completely. In 1835, a whaling crew working the same waters watched, horrified, as the Dutchman sailed at full speed directly into a cliff face. Multiple men on that crew swore under oath that they shouted warnings even though they knew it was pointless. The ship struck the rock and simply disappeared. No wreckage, no debris, nothing left behind to prove it had ever been there at all. Quick pause here. If stories like this one, real history colliding with something almost impossible to explain, are the reason you're on this channel, go ahead and subscribe now, because we've got a lot more of these waiting for you. All right, back to the water. But if you want the sighting that should genuinely unsettle you, it's the one that happened in broad daylight, on a calm, clear afternoon, in front of more than 60 ordinary witnesses. March 23, 1939. Glencairn Beach, just south of Cape Town. It was a perfect day, cloudless sky, flat calm sea, families building sandcastles, fishermen prepping their boats for the evening. Around 2 in the afternoon, someone screamed and pointed out to sea, and every head on that beach turned to watch a massive, square-rigged, 3-masted ship from the 1600s gliding silently across the water, roughly 400 yards from shore. Close enough, witnesses said afterward, to make out individual planks on the rotting hull. Close enough to see the torn rigging hanging in strips. Close enough to see shapes moving on deck that looked less like people and more like shadows cast on smoke. There was no sound, no creak of timber, no slap of water on the hull, nothing. A professional photographer on the beach that day, J.K. Langley, managed to raise his camera and get the ship in frame, and in the time it took him to press the shutter, the vessel began to fade. Not sail away, fade, like breath on cold glass. Within 30 seconds, it was gone completely. The Cape Argus newspaper sent reporters out to interview witnesses independently, and the descriptions lined up with disturbing precision. Same ship type, same tattered sails, same silence, same impossible vanishing act. Local maritime authorities checked the shipping records for that day and confirmed there was nothing, no historical replica, no film shoot, no vessel of any kind registered in those waters that could account for what 60 people had just watched happen in perfect daylight. So here's where most videos on this topic stop. They give you the mystery, they shrug, and they leave you with, maybe it's real, who knows. We're not going to do that to you, because there is an explanation. It's not supernatural, it's not a hoax. It's physics, and once you understand it, you'll never look at a horizon the same way again. It's called a superior mirage, and sailors who lived through it long before science had a name for it just called it Fata Morgana, after the sorceress of Arthurian legend, because it seemed like something conjured by magic. Here's what's actually happening. Light doesn't travel in a perfectly straight line through air of different temperatures it bends. Cold air is denser than warm air, and when you get a layer of cold air trapped directly beneath a layer of warmer air sitting above it, you create what's called a temperature inversion. Light passing through that boundary gets refracted, bent downward, curving over the horizon instead of traveling in a straight line off into space. The result is that objects which are actually below the horizon, completely out of normal line of sight, get lifted up into view. They can appear stretched vertically, compressed, duplicated, or flipped upside down, all depending on exactly how the temperature layers are stacked at that moment. And the Cape of Good Hope is, without exaggeration, one of the best places on the entire planet for this to happen. You have the frigid Benguela current flowing up from Antarctica running directly beneath warm air, pushing down off the African continent. That collision creates constant, powerful temperature inversions right along the exact shipping lanes where every Flying Dutchman sighting in history has taken place. Same location, century after century, because the atmospheric conditions that cause it are baked into the geography itself. This single mechanism explains almost everything about the legend. It explains why an ordinary merchant ship, one that might genuinely be sailing far below the horizon and completely out of normal view, could appear to be floating in midair, glowing, moving against the wind, and looking decades out of date. Because a superior mirage can stretch and distort an image so severely that a perfectly modern vessel looks ancient and warped. It explains the sudden appearances, because the mirage only exists while the temperature layers are aligned. And it explains the sudden disappearances, because the moment that inversion breaks down a shift in wind, a change in current, even a few degrees of temperature difference, the image collapses and vanishes, sometimes in a matter of seconds. That's not a ghost fading into the afterlife. That's an optical projection losing its lens. Skeptics will point out, correctly, that classic Fata Morgana mirages usually project objects that are 10 to 20 miles away, and some Flying Dutchman sightings, like the Bashantis, describe the ship at only a couple hundred yards. That's a fair challenge, and it's why this phenomenon alone doesn't explain every single detail of every sighting across 3 centuries. Some of it likely was misidentified nearby vessels, distorted by a milder version of the same refraction effect, magnified further by fear, darkness, and men who'd spent months at sea already primed to see the worst. Some of it may have involved bioluminescent plankton, which really can glow eerily around a hull in the right conditions, though that alone can't produce a solid rigged silhouette in broad daylight. And some researchers point to a darker possibility altogether. The seabed around the Cape holds more than 3,000 documented wrecks, many of them from that same Dutch Golden Age. Under the right current, a sunken hull with trapped air pockets can shift, rise, and briefly break the surface before sinking back into the dark. If that's ever really happened, then some witnesses weren't looking at an illusion or a living ship at all. They were looking at an actual tomb, a mass grave of sailors who died centuries ago. rising for a few seconds into daylight before the ocean pulled it back down. But the core mechanism, atmospheric refraction bending and lifting an image across a stretch of ocean famous for exactly that kind of temperature inversion, is the thread that ties nearly all of these stories together. And it is measurable, repeatable, documented science. And here is the part that turns this from a spooky story into a genuine tragedy. Because a superior mirage doesn't just conjure ghost ships out of nothing. It hides real danger in exactly the same way it creates false images. When a temperature inversion is strong enough to bend light and lift a distant ship into view, it is also strong enough to distort or completely erase the true horizon. Navigators relying on a visible horizon line to judge distance and position could be looking at a horizon that isn't where it appears to be at all. Ice, rock, reefs, and other ships could be sitting just beyond what looks like clear water, invisible or badly distorted by the exact same bending of light that made a merchant ship look like a ghost. This is not speculation dreamed up for a YouTube script. Maritime historian Tim Moulton spent years building a case that a superior mirage caused by a temperature inversion over the cold Labrador Current played a direct role in the sinking of the Titanic on the night of April 14, 1912. His research argues that the same kind of atmospheric refraction that produced centuries of Flying Dutchman sightings created a false horizon and haze that night, one that likely hid the iceberg from the lookouts until it was far too close to avoid, and may have also explained why the nearby ship Californian never saw the Titanic's distress rockets clearly or her lights until it was too late to help. If Moulton's research is correct, the same optical phenomenon that built a 300-year-old ghost story may have also killed more than 1,500 people in a single night. That's the real horror hiding underneath this legend. It was never really about a cursed captain damned to sail forever. It was a warning, passed from crew to crew for 3 centuries, about a real physical danger that could make the ocean lie to your eyes at the exact moment you needed to trust them most. Decken's crime, in the original telling, wasn't just arrogance, it was choosing speed and profit over the safety of his crew, in waters that were already killing 60,000 men a century. The ghost ship became the symbol of that greed. The mirage became the mechanism that made it feel real. Sightings haven't stopped either. In 2011, a fishing crew off Cape Town reported an old sailing ship appearing in fog for close to 3 minutes before dissolving completely. In 2016, a tourist captured distant footage that true believers still cite as evidence, though most researchers who've reviewed it think it's simply a modern yacht caught in hazy light. And in 2022, a research vessel using sonar detected what looked like a 17th century Dutch wreck sitting roughly 400 feet down, only for the same coordinates to come back empty 2 weeks later. Likely nothing more than shifting sediment or sonar interference, but enough to keep the legend breathing for one more generation of sailors. So no, the Flying Dutchman almost certainly wasn't a ghost. It wasn't Captain Decken, still lashed to a wheel, still cursing God, still trying to round a cape he was doomed to circle forever. It was something arguably more unsettling than that, because a curse only threatens the people who believe in it. A superior mirage doesn't care what you believe. It bent light over the Cape of Good Hope for a Dutch merchant crew in the 1600s, for a future King of England in 1795, for 11 Royal Navy sailors in 1881. For 60 families on a beach in 1939, and it is very likely still capable of doing the exact same thing today to any ship that crosses that stretch of ocean under the right conditions. The ghost was never real. The physics that built it never stopped being real for a single day. So if you ever find yourself on a ship near the Cape of Good Hope, and you see an old vessel glowing on the horizon, sailing against a wind that isn't blowing, don't reach for your camera. Reach for your instruments. Check your true bearing, and remember that the ocean has never needed ghosts to be one of the most dangerous places on Earth. It just needed light, and a little bit of cold air sitting where it shouldn't be. If this is the kind of story you want more of, real mysteries with a real explanation hiding underneath, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're going back into the deep every single week. Tell us in the comments, knowing what you know now, would you have believed your own eyes if you'd been standing on that beach in 1939? We'll see you in the next one.